Thank you, Ankita. I hope I'm audible, and unless otherwise, you can stop me. First of all, thank you to the Shenzyn team for providing this platform where we can come and share knowledge. So when Murli approached me, I was really excited that, there is an opportunity to share my learning, experience, and my thoughts with a group of like-minded people. And I did go back and looked at a lot of webinars done by Shenzyn, and they are very relevant. So thank you for creating this platform. Murli and I were also talking about the vision he has for the platform, the work that the team is doing. And I'm really inspired by what Shenzyn team is doing, and I'm sure that they're going to achieve their vision pretty soon and work towards creating a great platform for diversity and for leadership. So today's topic that I'm going to talk about is very dear to me. It did not really take me a long time to come up with or decide that I'm going to talk about organization culture. I've been really passionate about how culture works and how it evolves in teams, in small groups, and organizations. Now, in terms of a quick background, I worked for nearly a decade or so, which was primarily in organization and talent development and with a few multinationals. And then I went to study organization and social psychology. Now, when you go and you study psychology, which is really about business psychology, there is a lot of formats it created and a lot of thoughts that it generated. And my study was really around organization culture. It's been nearly a decade since I graduated, but I'm still equally passionate about how culture manifests in teams, in groups, and in organizations. What I'm going to talk about is a priority for every organization leader and manager, which is to create a culture that fosters very high performance. Now, there are various facets to high performance, and trust and care is an essential ingredient to building high perform teams in organizations. In the next half hour, I'm going to just share the structure of how I'm going to do it. So I will start with talking about organization culture. I'll talk about why trust is important and what is the psychological safety that has suddenly become an important buzzword and people are talking about. I will also talk about what care means and really try to provoke some thoughts around diversity. Like any other researcher, I will start with conceptual understanding and I will build upon what is already known to a lot of us, but I'm going to create some models with it. And like any other practitioner, I want to keep it simple and I want to use examples as we move along. Now, could you just go to the next slide, please? We've heard it several times, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it doesn't get old. Talk to anyone who has lived it, anyone who's reaching a managerial stage, but what does it really even mean? What it means is that you can come up with a lot of concepts, you can come up with plans, you can create business plans, but at the end of it, if your people are not achievement oriented, if they are not willing to execute, you can't really make it happen. And that's where culture is very, very important. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Culture is always spoken about in the form of iceberg, and if who has ever attended any program, any discussions, any conversation culture, this is the first thing that is the culture iceberg. I'm going to quickly explain what that means. What say like an iceberg, when you hear about it, really culture is visible to us. Now, I want to ask you, and I'm going to ask you, so please get them out of that. For the convenience and not about culture culture is visible, and I'm referring purely to organization culture. So just a quick on what are the things that are visible in an organization that define its culture. How do you know that a culture, and we all talk about what is good and what is bad, what is visible to us, how things are done, practices, values, and belief. How about how up? Is it very visible whether you're wearing formal or whether you wear informal? Communication, how communication happens. So let's switch over. What is underneath the surface of the water? What part of the cultural iceberg is not visible? Just quickly, what are the things that define culture in an organization but we really can't see? You can type it out on the chat. How senior treats junior, the subordinate colleague relationship. Cost and financials, okay, the way things get done. So these are all great ideas. What is visible is things that we see. How do we talk to each other? Open policy example. Now, whether it is visible and invisible both. In a visible way, what is visible in open door policy is whether doors are literally open or not, whether there are cabins, how many people really sit in the cabins, are the meeting happening outside or do they happen inside? And then there is what is underneath the surface in terms of open door policy. While we are talking that we are an open culture, but we're not very transparent, we don't share information and data actively, and that goes underneath the surface on how it happens, how the relationships work out. The visible part is how people talk to each other, how they greet each other. But in a dyadic relationship, and this is what I will talk about later, is whether there is trust or not. Am I open to sharing my ideas or I'm not open to sharing ideas? Even in communication, how do we communicate? How are our practices? These are very visible. Do you have a lot of process? Do you have less process? Are you, do you brainstorm a lot? Or do you just have a process around it and you don't brainstorm and one person comes up with the idea? A lot of this is really visible. But what are things that are not visible? What is not visible is how we treat our people or what we really think behind our treatment of people. Could you just go to the next slide? And I'm going to cover a different model quickly, and then I'll bring both the models together for the understanding. Now, this is a model. If you go about organization culture, you will see it. This is developed by Edgar Schein and very popular. So culture in organization, according to Schein, manifests in three ways. One is the artifacts, which are visible, espoused values, and underlying assumptions. The artifacts are things that you see, whether we use computers, desktops, laptops, what kind of benefits are available to people, what kind of processes are followed, how hierarchical the culture is, how do you dress up, how do you take your breaks, whether you have to be at work, and everybody's talking about work from home. So we should mention that whether people are allowed to work from office, allowed to work from home, or they have to be in office all the time. So these are some of the visible elements. Then there are espoused values. Now think about it, something that is under the surface, but is slightly visible to us, which are things you interpret. For example, the core values or the vision statement of the organization on where does the company want to be, the core values, how it is defined. These are espoused values. And then there are the underlying assumptions, which is really unconscious. Now, how does a culture even develop in an organization? Think about startups. When a startup comes together, there are about 2 or 3 people who started initially, maybe 5, and team size is typically less than 10 when you start. A lot of culture that is decided or defined is based on the underlying assumptions of the co-founders or the leaders who bring the startup together. Now, these underlying assumptions can be from their personal experience on how their managers treated them or what they have read. Like Google is a really cool company, and how do we get some of those benefits within our organization? Um, and then the startup increases, it scales, it becomes 50, it becomes 100, it becomes 200 and 500 employees, and then the leaders have now lost control. The co-founders would have at some stage brought in other leaders who had their own underlying assumptions, and then they develop their espoused values, and then they create artifacts, may or may not create artifacts. Now, a leader may have this. I'll use an example here. The startup founder comes from a very open, informal culture, and wants to have a really cool environment where people can have fun at work. Whereas the leader who's come has his own pressures to deal with. The startup has now had funding, and the VCs are expecting certain thing out of this leader. And then the leader has to deliver. There are project timelines, and suddenly the fun culture disappears and it becomes something else. So how do you go and recreate a culture that you started with? How do you stick to your underlying assumptions is the question that I want to talk about. How do you still maintain the core essence or the values of the culture that you initially started up with? It's difficult to do, but then that's when you go back to your artifacts and espoused values. You start creating behaviors, you start defining processes which allow for the core values to come back, which is the values of fun. So let me take another example here. It's really cool to work in, so when a startup is created, there were a lot of thoughts around working out of garage, you work out of single room, you work out of a home, and you're having fun, you're ordering in, and then some of the for example, you bring in socializing Friday evenings, and then this is reversing the effect. So you start with the underlying assumptions, and then you move up to the artifacts. And then when you have to reverse, or when you have to incorporate the culture within an organization, you reverse it by bringing in or creating behaviors and artifacts which will influence, which will reverse the process. I'm going to move on to talking about how these two overlaps. To the next slide, please. So what is visible is the artifacts, and underlying assumptions are completely at the bottom. And then there are espoused values, which are fairly visible. Let's move on to talking a little bit about trust. Please move to the next slide. So I started looking at what happens, or how is trust looked at by different in different research, and I found that trust has been researched in philosophy, in neuroscience, in sociology, in economics, in psychology, and even in management and business studies. And I think it is about you don't notice it's there until it's not there. It's only mistrust when you really find it visible. Please move on to the next slide. This is just to understand the difference in the trust. Now, trust happens at institution level and it happens at relation level. And at institution level, trust is around, I trust a certain brand because Shah Rukh Khan is advertising it, or I trust a certain brand because it's Indian, or I trust a certain brand because they have delivered to commitments over and over again. As in when I work with them, I trust them. And then there is a relationship-based trust, where I have worked with a person earlier, and I'm willing to go back and work with them. This can be at an organization level, it can be at an individual level. It's a dyadic relationship. So trust between a manager and a subordinate is built together through their interaction. And this trust can be built via control or via intrinsic trust. Control is where you have agreements, where you sign an employment agreement, you have an appointment letter which defines here is the salary you'll get, here is when you will get it. And trust is, intrinsic trust is that I believe my salary will come on time. So I know that I can trust this organization, and that is how these are the ways trust is really defined. Can we move on to the next one? I want to cover the 4 elements that define trust. So the first element I want to talk about is reliability. Reliability is about keeping promises that you make. And the more you keep promises, the trust increases. And that's where I said that trust is visible when you don't do something. So when you break a commitment is when suddenly there is the absence of trust, which is noticed. So reliability develops trust, especially when you're talking about relationship-based trust. Reliability becomes critical. So when a manager is giving a time-bound task or a job to the subordinate, and the subordinate delivers it in time, and this continues over and over again, there is a reliability or there's a trust relationship that is formed between them. I'm going to come to congruence first, right after reliability, because congruence and reliability sometimes are confused. Congruence is about being straightforward. It is about not saying white lies because I want to not hurt somebody's feelings. So congruence is saying that, look, I'm trying for your promotion, but it may or may not happen. So that is from a manager level, that whether there can be congruence, and whether the manager is straightforward in their dealing with the subordinate. Similarly, it comes from the subordinate saying that, look, I really need a break today because I'm exhausted, or I want to spend time with my family. And that is the trusting relationship that grows. Now, if I am being straightforward, but it is not accepted, and then the trust is lost. So acceptance is the third way trust manifests. Acceptance is about, this is who I am, this is how I function, and can you work with me in this capacity? Can you accept me? Can you accept that instead of taking half hour, I will need to spend 2 hours on a particular piece of work? And that is acceptance. The fourth element is openness. Openness is about how open I am to looking at, accepting or exploring new ideas or the other person's thought process. So when we are developing a culture of trust, and we're talking about the below the surface things like whether someone is reliable, open, accepting, and congruent, we're also looking at behaviors that correspond to them. Now, behaviors of reliability is doing something, saying only things that you can deliver and on time. So these are the 4 elements of trust. These are the 4 elements that manifest or they build trust. This will have to happen right from a manager and a subordinate relationship, but these are the things that can be done even at an organization level. And that's where we talk about diversity programs, that I'm open to diversity. I'm open to bringing new ideas or thoughts within the organization. I'm accepting to different styles of working. And that's how organizations or teams build trust within the team or the group. Can we move on to the next slide, please? This is a question I want to ask. How does it feel when you feel safe at work? Can we have a quick, again, go back to the chat window and just describe how it feels when you feel safe? Comfortable? feels like home. You feel safe at home. How do you talk when you feel safe? How do you talk in a meeting, for example, when you feel safe? You feel more open. Be me is okay. I can be myself. I feel confident. And that is what feeling safe is about. That is the concept I want to talk about, which is psychological safety. Could we move to the next slide, please? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you just stay on that one? Let me talk a little more about psychological safety, and I'll come to it. Psychological safety is about the freedom to express myself. Safety comes from different aspects, of course. It comes from whether there is security in the office when I'm working late. Now, people in Delhi, Gurgaon are more conscious about this aspect of safety. In Bangalore, you think about safety, that will I be able to reach home on time and safely? How much can I just work from home when it's raining or it's going to get crowded? How safe do you feel? Psychological safety is about safety of expressing yourself. It is about safety in taking risk at work. So the right word there is about taking risk. Can you take a risk at work? Can I feel vulnerable expressing my opinion? Can I share openly how an idea I have? And what are the fears that we work with? We work with the fear of being judged. We fear that uh, we will be looked at differently because we gave a bad idea or it wasn't acceptable to my manager, and my promotion can get affected. Psychological safety is about treating, and how you create it is by treating everything as a learning rather than evaluation. So how managers or organization creates psychological safety is where you can provide an environment where people can innovate, and innovation requires taking that risk. um, Psychological safe organizations are much more innovative, and there is a lot of research that is done on these aspects as well. So building psychological safety takes providing a trusting environment, and that's where I want to explain in the next slide. There is a process in how do you create an environment. Now this is we're bringing all the concepts together. So in organization psychology, we talk about everything as a process. We try to create a model out of it. You give an input, you have a process, and then you get an output. Please move to the next slide. In this case, trust is an input you provide to create a psychological safe environment. And the elements of trust were the simple four elements. You provide more reliability, you provide congruence, you provide an open environment, an accepting environment, and that leads to a psychological safe environment where people do what they say. People are more open to ideas and accepting of what a lot of people find as foolish ideas, or that anybody can come up with idea. But that is the psychological safe environment you provide, which leads to a more innovative and a high performing culture. Now in all of this, these are the things. Providing a psychological safe environment is where you are really caring for the people. And I'm going to go back to talking about the care that lies underneath the surface. How do I know that the organization really cares for me? The organization cares for me when there is environment where I can develop my career, where I can be safe to I can safely share my ideas, and I can provide my inputs without the fear of being judged or reprimanded. Um, so this is what I wanted to cover primarily on organization culture and how managers and organizations can create an environment and a culture which is trusting, which cares for its people, and that leads to high performance. Now, I want to cover a couple of quick things that you can refer to or examples of how people are doing this. Uh, so there are ways to create a more trusting environment. When we talk about empowerment or care, uh, it's not just about giving, for example, a work from home, but making sure what are the struggles of working from home. The biggest struggle, for example, today of working from home is whether there is a good internet connection at home, phone connection. Everybody struggles with it. Accessibility is a big struggle. So when we are creating a trusting environment, we're keeping all of this in mind. And organizations have to look at these artifacts, these simple things that can be done so that people feel cared for. There are a lot of studies that have been done on the value of creating such an environment, and there is PwC, there is Harvard Business, there's Great Places to Work, which all talk about how trust and psychological safety leads to better environment at work and high performing teams. So one last thought on creating psychological safety, care, and trust that I want to leave you with is that when we look at diversity, um, the primary lens, of course, is of gender, and we look at how do we hire more people to create a diverse organization. But when we're really caring, we are also not just looking at diversity, acceptance, and openness, but we also need to look at openness from the care provider, caregiver perspective, understanding the life stages, the diversity of life stages that your team members would be in. They may be singles, there may be some who have responsibilities at home. There are women with young kids or responsibilities. There are newly married couple who are struggling with their own things. There are a lot of issues and a lot of stages that people are in their life while they are at work. A great organization, when they look at providing care within the organization, um, also starts looking at how do they provide these facilities or benefits or create sort of brainstorming groups where create groups where people can come together and from a similar life stage and have conversation, find support within the company itself. So I'm going to with that I'm going to move to the last slide. People don't forget how you make them feel, and people still talk about organizations uh, that they felt good at, and that is where I would leave you with that we need to create an organization that is talked about or remembered. Okay, thank you. We can move to the questions.
Thank you so much, Mayanka. Thank you. I think we are ready to take questions. So, audience, in case you have any questions, please use the chat box, and we can spend some time on answering the questions. So, Mayanka, by the time people ask their questions, I wanted to ask one question. That
Sure.
generally, when people new joinees are there as a part of the organization, every year we have that induction program and some welcome sessions and all of that. Today, because of COVID, we are not able to do that. So, what are the ways and tips that the existing people in the organization can apply to make sure that the new joinees who have joined the company but are working from home can feel comfortable, can feel welcome, included as a part of the team, because we are not really seeing them, we don't really we are not really interacting with them, we are not seeing them. So what are the ways, tips, anything that you can share with us?
I think that's a great question. And interestingly, I was talking to a friend of mine who happened to shift organizations within the lockdown. So she had her exit formalities done from the previous organization while in lockdown, and she's joined a new company. So some of the things that people do really well, or some of the practices that can be adopted are, of course, a lot of video time with each other, with the team. So communication then becomes really critical. How much do you communicate? How you're interacting? Providing a buddy always helps to have buddy program where someone can be a virtual buddy in navigating the organization. Some of the initial things that need to be done. Although the organizations need to be very mindful of the fact that the onboarding time in a lockdown would now increase. It wouldn't be the customary 1 or 2 or a month that organizations used to take. It will have to increase, lengthen out a little bit. So I think those are some of the things that can be done. One is around creating buddy program, being mindful that onboarding has to be elongated, and getting a lot of visual time, which is video time with everybody.
Right. Thank you, son. Thank you so much, Mayanka. I don't see any questions from the audience. Guys, in case you have any questions, please use the chat box so that we can spend some time in answering them.
Yes, so let me move on to the next one. Work from home has affected almost every industry and has huge impact in building trust within teams on large scale. How do we deal with it? I think that's a very, very relevant question right now. We have, on one hand, we're talking about trust, we're talking about caring for people. On the other hand, HR especially goes back and terminates people. There are layoffs happening everywhere. There is very little job security. I think there is no easy answer to it. How do you deal with it? I think how you deal with it is at a very individual and a group level. And I'm going to use the example of the email written by the Airbnb CEO before they did the layoffs. And it was a layoff telling people that, look, we're going to fire a whole bunch of people. Here are the things that we are doing for you. We're giving you health benefits for so long. We're looking at these things. The only way you can do is that you use a lot of soft-handed care when you are dealing with things. You have to deal with a lot of employee annoyance, things that they are getting a little agitated about. You'll have to deal with all of that. The other thing that can be done is to safeguard people who are your high performers and make sure that you build trust with them by letting them know that you value them and you're going to take care of them. The other things that some organizations have done is they have continued with their promotion cycles without even, maybe without doing any increments and showing intent. So it comes down to really intent. And the second thing that it comes down to is communicating of this intent and taking some action on it, at least halfway there. So when you convey the intent properly and with a little bit of action, I think that can restore some of the trust, but definitely safeguard the people that you want to hold on to. And it's great organizations that don't have to do layoffs, but if they are doing, then how do they make sure that their high performers or the people who have to stay are taken care of? How do you reassure them of this? So going to take up the next question with this one, which is how do you trust, how trust can be built when there are layoffs happening? I think even with layoffs, you can provide things like outplacement services for your teams. And while there are less jobs in the market, people who are doing well and you have to cut down your teams because not because of performance, but because of the cost issues, then outplacement services are one way to approach it. Um, Also, when anybody doing layoff, my recommendation always is that please plan ahead. Um, I have seen layoffs in organizations where it is done every 2 months, and that creates so much mistrust, insecurity within the organization that after a point, people are just thinking about the layoff and not really working. So if you have to do it in a single go, and let people who stay back, assure them that nothing is going to happen. So plan ahead, look at your business plans for another year or so, maybe 2 years, and then decide what kind of staffing is required. So work on your staffing and your business plans before you even take action on it. The next is around lack of trust and acceptance in team can bring down a person's performance. Oh, absolutely. And there are a lot of studies that I was talking about, and you don't have to believe me. You can believe PwC, Harvard Business, and any big organization talking about it. That a lack of trust and acceptance will bring down a person's performance. Think about it. If I'm not sure how my work will be used, or if I won't get credit for my work, or no matter how great I think my idea is, it is not implemented, I'm going to be demotivated. I'm going to do my bare minimum and not really stretch it out. So it does affect. Work from also affected psychological health. So we're talking about work from home. I'm assuming in this question. I'm going to read through a few other questions because there is like 3-4 of them. So I'm going to start with work from home and its effect on psychological health. It definitely affects everybody. I mean, think about it. A lot of people are cooking, cleaning, and they're not used to it. There is suddenly all the work that they did at home, and then the work in office doesn't really go away. There are some of the initiatives that can be taken by organizations, and we in our organization took a few initiatives around. We did some lockdown chats with our staff, which was around talking about how they're feeling, are they learning any new skill, how they're coping with things at home, and general well-being. We also saw a lot of initiatives happen at ground level where some of our junior managers have gone out and started sending motivational videos or motivational talks within their own small team groups. I know of a lot of other organizations who have used external counselors and helpers who can come and talk to the staff even one-on-one or in groups to help them stay a little healthy. There are organizations that are doing video yoga sessions, meditation sessions, and whatnot. So there are a lot of initiatives that can be taken at organization level. What it also requires at a very small team level is taking care of your team, talking to them frequently, and not just about work, but also about how are they dealing with things, how are they dealing with the situation, and how are they feeling, and encouraging them to take a break once in a while, because suddenly we're working all hours, and the work doesn't stop. There is no line between work and home. So helping keeping it sane from an organization level, cutting off work hours or not scheduling odd hour meetings, telling everybody actively that don't work after this hour, or even encouraging people to take leaves like they would otherwise. I think these are some of the things that can be done. The next question is, I'm going to take up the question on employees in fear and being less productive when going to work. So we are all talking, and this is something I have been reading, that everybody's talking about how the future looks like everybody can work from home. And it sounds really nice and cool, but it is not possible for everybody. Some people have to show up at work. And I was attending another webinar where HR head of one of the big airlines came and said that unlike the other speakers, he said, I can't have a pilot work from home. And I think that really is the reality. There are some people and it is a utilization measure of the work. They have to be available. They have to be talking to the customers or dealing with things or even taking care of your employees in some cases. I think that is bound to happen, and productivity will get affected, but I think it is important to create that safe environment at work. So that the fear of corona is not there. Now, whether it is by creating a lot of providing with sanitizers, providing with masks, even providing, some organizations are providing office cabs to commute. And some of these things can be done. At an individual level, I think it is more about talking to people, helping them feel safe, and coming up with a model which is to begin with a partial work from home and partial in office, so that there is not complete exposure of the employee outside. I think some of these things can be done where you look at a partial or a combination work setup. I'm going to go back to the question, which is how will trust play a role when organization is going through transition? So we spoke about culture transformation earlier, that but this is more about when an organization is changing. And I'm going to use an example of banks and the banking and financial services. And I come from the sector, so I've heard of other organizations in similar sector. So why we were thinking how will our employees work from home, even pre-lockdown, we were deciding, and how do we make it happen? Because typically in banking and financial sector, you wouldn't find that laptops and work from home is a commonplace. It's not really. So we were talking about another organization where they had bought some 300 laptops before the lockdown, because they wanted to make sure that their employees had it. So it is one part to provide the resources, um, but trusting the employee for working from home is also something that needs to be built, and it comes down to really about reliability. Am I telling that I will complete this work today, and am I delivering that today? Which is about reliability of your actions. It is about being straightforward, the congruence part, that look, I'm not feeling well today, I'm not going to work, or I'm going to just take a leave. I'm not going to mark my attendance just because I checked my email a few times. But these are things that build trust. When you bring in a transparency of communication, that look, I am sitting at home, but I'm not fully working. And that is what builds trust, being straightforward about it. Or and these are things where trust, when you're transitioning, is important. Now, while I used the lockdown example, even in office, when you're transitioning, whether it is from one role to another, you have to restart the trust cycle, and you have to go back to those four elements to develop that trusting bond or trust relationship. The last question is, do you believe that opening up with the team or company as an individual is a sign of showing trust to others? Oh, absolutely. And openness is one of the major things that drive trust. Let's also understand this from a very business context. You know, we are all professionals, and it's all right to share a certain level of information, but opening up to the extent where it is not in the professional realm becomes a problem also sometimes. So, and I'm referring to opening up about, I heard a rumor kind of a thing, and not really oh, I have a problem. But talking about somebody else and opening up on those counts may not really work. But I'm guessing this question is more from the openness perspective. And openness is about being transparent, being upfront, and being able to share thoughts and ideas with confidence. That's what openness is about. Okay, I hope I've addressed all the questions. Um, Please highlight if I've missed anything.
I think, yeah, I don't see any more questions, Mayanka. Um,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful session, Mayanka. Thank you so much. And all of us who have joined the session today, thank you so much for joining in today. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar series is ongoing. So in case you're interested in attending any such webinars in the future, please you can register yourselves and attend the same. So before we close, Mayanka, any last words before we close?
No, I think they were great questions. I had a good time interacting with everybody, and thank you to the Shenzyn team. I think this is great to be able to talk to a bunch of people who are thinking in similar direction, who are thinking about same things, and are in the same space really on how we are functioning. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Thank you.